My name is Kirk Forrester, and I haven't worn a ranger uniform in over 50 years. Not because I retired, because I was erased. What I'm about to tell you is the account that cost me everything: my badge, my career, my credibility, and eventually the quiet understanding of the people I loved. Back in 1968, we didn't talk about trauma or whistleblowers. We talked about doing our job and keeping our mouths shut. And if you failed at the second part, the Forest Service had ways of making sure you never failed again. I was 34 years old when it happened, 10 years into service. Vietnam-era America, distrust everywhere, but the parks were supposed to be different. Neutral ground, sacred ground, that's what they told us. What they didn't tell us was how much effort went into keeping certain things unseen. The first warning didn't come from a supervisor. It came from another ranger, an older man named Dale Hargreave. He'd been around since the late 40s, back when patrol trucks didn't have doors and radios were considered a luxury. He caught me in the garage one morning while I was checking the oil on my truck. "You ever notice," he said quietly, "how some areas never need maintenance?" I shrugged. "Depends on foot traffic." He shook his head. "No, I mean areas no one talks about. No trails, no reports, no rescues, like they don't exist." I laughed it off. That was my mistake. 2 weeks later, I received the assignment. No paperwork, no carbon copy, just a verbal order delivered through the analog radio clipped to my belt while I was eating lunch in the break room. "Forrester, take the northwestern sweep tomorrow, solo." I paused. "That sector S not on rotation." "Static then, just do the sweep." That was it. I checked the maps that afternoon, big folded paper ones, edges worn soft from years of handling. The northwestern area was odd. It wasn't marked restricted. It wasn't marked anything. Just blank contour lines and forest shading, like someone had deliberately avoided labeling it. Dale saw me studying it. "Don't log anything you don't have to," he said. "What happens if I do?" He didn't answer. The next morning I took the truck out before sunrise. Old green Forest Service pickup, manual transmission, radio antenna rattling every time I hit a bump. I carried the usual gear: flashlight, paper map, compass, logbook, spare batteries. Everything by the book. The forest didn't feel wrong at first. That's important. No sudden dread, no obvious threat, just quiet. A little too quiet maybe, but forests do that sometimes, especially early. About 3 miles in, the radio began to behave strangely. Not static, not interference, just a delay. I'd speak, release the button, and hear my own voice come back a second later, warped, slowed, like it had traveled farther than it should have. I stopped calling in position updates. That was when I noticed the trees. They were older than the surrounding forest, thicker trunks, bark darkened like it had been exposed to smoke long ago, and they grew closer together the farther I walked, compressing the space in a way that made judging distance difficult. 10 yards looked like 20. 20 felt like 5. I marked my location on the map. When I looked back down, the mark was gone. I know what you're thinking: paper shifts, pencil smudges, human error. I marked it again, pressed hard. Turned my head, looked back. Gone. That was the moment my stomach tightened, not with fear, but with understanding. The kind that arrives before panic, when your instincts recognize something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. I heard a sound then, not an animal, too deliberate, like something adjusting its position. I called out, "Ranger protocol, announce presence." No response. But the sound stopped. I continued forward, telling myself I'd go another 100 yards and turn back. That's how it always starts, reasonable limits that slowly dissolve. I found the boot prints near a dry creek bed, standard issue Ranger boots, size maybe 11, fresh. No debris settled into them yet. They ended abruptly. Not veering, not obscured. Just stopped. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the ground, trying to reconcile what I was seeing. That was when the radio clicked on by itself. No voice. Just breathing. Slow, measured, patient. I tore the radio from my belt and shut it off. The breathing continued for another 2 seconds before stopping. I turned in a slow circle. The forest felt occupied. Not watched, accounted for. I backed away step by step until my heel struck something solid. I looked down. A wooden marker, old, weathered, no numbers, no trail designation, just a symbol carved deep into it, 3 vertical lines crossed by a 4th. I didn't write that down. I should have. Instead, I did what the Forest Service trained us to do best. I left. By the time I reached the truck, my hands were shaking. I drove straight back, didn't finish the sweep, didn't radio in. When I got to the station, I found out something that changed everything. Another ranger had been assigned that same sector the week before. Officially, he'd taken leave. Unofficially, no one would say his name. And that was when I realized this wasn't about patrols. It was about silence. No one said his name, but I already knew it. You don't forget the men you train with. You don't forget their voices on the radio, the way they lean against a truck, the way they swear when a map tears at the fold. His name was Raymond Klein, and 3 days before my assignment, he joked about how the northwestern sector felt older than the rest of the park. I went looking for his logbook that afternoon. The records room was in the basement, concrete walls, metal shelves, the smell of damp paper and oil. Rows of logbooks sat in chronological order, thick spines stamped with years and ranger IDs. I found Ray's slot easily. It was empty. Not missing, not misfiled. Empty, as if it had never existed. I stood there longer than I should have, hand resting on the shelf, listening to the building creak above me. That was when I understood something that hadn't occurred to me out in the woods. The forest wasn't the only thing erasing evidence. That night, I wrote my report anyway. I didn't embellish. I didn't speculate. I stuck to observable facts: radio malfunction, unexplained boot prints, environmental inconsistencies. I avoided words like entity or presence. I even left out the marker symbol. I thought that would protect me. The next morning, my supervisor called me into his office. He closed the door behind me and didn't offer a seat. "Your report is detailed," he said. "That's the job." He nodded slowly. "You're alleging conditions that don't align with prior surveys." "I'm reporting what happened." He slid the paper back across the desk. I noticed something immediately. My report was thinner. Pages were missing. I flipped through it, heart pounding. The radio incident was gone. The boot prints were gone. The section where I noted the forest density changes, gone. What remained was a bland patrol summary that might as well have been written by someone else. "I didn't submit this version," I said. "No," he replied calmly, "you didn't." That was the first time I felt real fear, not of the forest, but of the system that wrapped around it. They reassigned me the same day. Desk duty, equipment checks, no patrols, no explanation, just a quiet removal from the field as if proximity itself was the problem. Raymond Klein's name never came up again until I found his truck. It was parked at the far edge of the service lot, half hidden behind a maintenance shed. Dust coated the windshield. The tires were flat. It looked like it had been sitting there for years, not days. I checked the glove compartment. His map was inside, folded open to the northwestern sector. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. An irregular boundary penciled lightly into the paper, almost erased, like someone had drawn it and then tried to forget they had. Inside the boundary was a single note, written in Ray's handwriting. "Doesn't move like it should." I didn't have time to process that before I heard footsteps. Two men stood at the edge of the shed. Not rangers, no uniforms, plain coats, clean boots, the kind of men who don't belong in the woods. "You shouldn't be in here," one of them said. "I'm inventorying vehicles," I replied, because that's what I'd been trained to do, answer calmly, truthfully enough to sound convincing. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That vehicle has already been processed." "For what?" I asked. "For closure." They took the map. They didn't ask. The following week I was asked, politely, firmly, to provide a formal statement. Not about the forest, about my fitness for duty, my sleep habits, my stress levels, whether I'd ever experienced disorientation, hallucinations, or paranoia. I realized then what was happening. They weren't denying the events. They were reclassifying me. I pushed back, filed a second report, this one more explicit. I described the radio breathing, the disappearing markings, the impossible boot prints. I even drew the marker symbol from memory. That report never made it past my desk. Instead, I was called into a hearing. No charges, no accusations, just concern. They used words like instability and misinterpretation. They cited my fixation on a fellow ranger's leave status. They suggested time off. Permanent time off. I turned in my badge 2 weeks later. No ceremony. No explanation given to my peers. Just a quiet exit and a note in my file that followed me everywhere after. Unreliable. I tried to move on. Took a job outside the parks. Told myself the forest was behind me. But sometimes, at night, I'd wake up to the sound of breathing that wasn't mine, slow, measured, patient. And I'd remember the way the TR. Ease compressed space, the way distance lied, the way the forest felt like it was organizing itself around me. I never went back. But I know this. Whatever exists out there didn't take Ray by accident. And it didn't let me go because I escaped. It let me go because I reported it. And someone, decided the cost of that truth was worth paying. I thought losing the job would be the end of it. I was wrong. When you're labeled unreliable in a system built on documentation, the label spreads quietly. Background checks stalled. Job offers evaporated. Friends stopped calling, not out of malice, but because someone somewhere had decided I was difficult. The kind of man who saw patterns where none existed. That was the official story. Unofficially, the forest never let go. For years after 1968, I kept a habit I couldn't break. Whenever I moved, I unfolded paper maps on kitchen tables and traced old park boundaries with my finger, looking for gaps, places that seemed smoothed over, simplified, erased. I found more than a few. Always the same traits. No trail names, no elevation notes, no incident records. Blank spaces pretending to be normal forest. I wrote letters at first, to former colleagues, to regional offices. Careful, measured questions. Most went unanswered. A few came back with polite dismissals. One came back unopened, stamped return to sender, even though the address was correct. I stopped writing after that. What I didn't stop doing was listening. Old habits die hard. When you've spent years depending on analog radios, your ears learn to separate signal from noise. Late at night, I'd sit in my living room with a cheap receiver I'd bought secondhand, scanning frequencies I knew by heart. Most nights there was nothing. Static, weather chatter, distant truckers. But every once in a while, I'd hear it. Breathing. Not loud, not threatening, just present. Always on the same frequency I'd used back in the park. Always stopping the moment I reached for a pen. I never logged those moments. Some lessons stick. In the mid-70s, I ran into Dale Hargreave again by accident. A hardware store of all places. He looked smaller, older, like the forest had finally taken its weight from him. We didn't shake hands. "They still keeping you quiet?" he asked. "I don't work there anymore," I said. He nodded. "Doesn't matter." We stood in silence for a long moment. Then he leaned closer. "You were right to write it down," he said. "That's why you're still here." I wanted to ask him what he meant. Wanted to ask about Ray, about the boundaries, about how long he'd known. But when I turned back, he was already walking away. That was the last time I saw anyone from the service. The truth, the part no one ever explained, is that the forest doesn't need secrecy to survive. We need it, because acknowledging certain things forces responsibility, forces decisions, forces sacrifice. Some places don't behave like land. They behave like systems. They observe, they adapt, they decide what can remain and what must be absorbed. And when something crosses a line it shouldn't, whether that's a ranger, a record, or a question, it doesn't react with violence. It reacts with correction. Ray wasn't taken because he wandered too far. He was taken because he noticed the boundary. And I wasn't spared because I was lucky. I was spared because I put it on paper. There's power in that, more than people realize. Systems built on silence don't know how to handle written truth. They can bury it, discredit it, erase it from official memory, but they can't make it never have existed. That's why I'm telling you now. I don't expect belief. I don't want vindication. I want a record that exists outside filing cabinets and locked rooms. Words that can't be quietly replaced or thinned down until they say nothing. If you ever work in the parks, if you're ever assigned somewhere no one wants to talk about, if your map looks a little too clean, a little too unfinished, pay attention. Notice which reports disappear. Notice which names stop being spoken. Notice how often the explanation is simpler than the reality. And if you ever hear breathing on a dead frequency, don't answer. Some accounts cost careers. Some cost lives. And some are allowed to exist only once, spoken aloud at the very end by someone with nothing left to take.